All right. Good morning, Doug. Today, I'd like to talk to you about an assortment of economic news, starting with food prices. And what caught my attention is in 2000, I saw I believe it's the FAO food price index, and that index in real price terms is about at its 2010 peak. Now, what happened in 2010? It was the Arab Spring, which was brought on apparently significantly, at least, due to food prices that made things totally unaffordable. And I guess what are your thoughts on this? Well, how does it portend for the future?
Well, I hate to have an unremitting diet of gloom and doom for our listeners, but especially when we're talking about food prices, I guess diet is the right word, isn't it? And I'm not sure how many people actually follow commodity prices, but if you look at the price of wheat, corn, and soybeans, three big grains here in the West, and rice too, uh, they're really getting up there. And oddly enough, farmers are not making a killing, even with prices pushing their old highs again. Uh, and of course, farmers are buried under a ton of debt too, and they're still not making any money at these prices. Some, but look, what set off the color revolutions in the Arab world 10 years ago was basically high food prices. I think it started with a vendor in Tunisia who was being shaken down by a government apparatchik for some taxes or God knows what. And things got violent, and one thing led to another, and it spread all across the Arab world. And I think that could happen again. And the Arab country that I watch the most, and is it the one that I've visited the most? It probably is Egypt. And it's very interesting. It's kind of the intellectual center, and in many ways, the center of the Islamic world. Well, maybe not the Islamic world, but the Arab Islamic world is what I'm trying to say. And if you look at where Egypt, how it survives, tourism is, I think, its major single source of income, or close to it. But there haven't been any tourists in Egypt during this COVID hysteria. And the next thing is the Suez Canal, the tolls that they take in. And traffic has gone down a lot along with world commerce. So that's fallen. And the other big thing, bigger than the Suez Canal, is remittances from overseas Egyptians, just like overseas Haitians and overseas Filipinos, and lots of people from poor countries go to richer countries and work and send the money back home to support the family. Okay, in Egypt, this is a big thing. But with the whole world tightening up, that's gone down too. So I'm asking myself, how is the average Egyptian living at this point, especially now where his income's gone down, was never great. And at the same time, food has gone up a lot. And I think it's headed a lot higher, quite frankly. We're actually in a new commodity bull market. So what are the political consequences of this going to be? Another interesting thing, going off on a little tangent, and I'm trying to remember the names of these people, but I have such a hard time remembering the names of obscure politicians. Who was this Egyptian politician who was basically the running dog of the Americans? I think it was Mubarak.
Yep, Mubarak.
That, yeah, who ran Egypt for decades. And then he was kicked out. They had an election.
He was kicked out because
And who did the Egyptians elect? They elected a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, rather radical guy. And I guess the US and what was left of the deep state for Mubarak in Egypt displaced him. And now we've got a guy who's just like Mubarak doing the same stuff. So it's a time bomb waiting to go off. And if it happens in Egypt, it's going to happen for much the same reasons in the rest of the MENA area, Middle East, North Africa. So yeah, this rise in commodity prices that we're seeing, maybe mildly inconvenient for American shoppers, but it could have really big consequences in other parts of the world. And this is just the MENA area we're talking about. Lots of other places that the basic person eats basic food, and basic food doubles. What's he going to do?
Right.
So
They have less discretionary income. So much more of their basic income just goes to pay for food. Food prices go up a reasonable degree, and then there just isn't enough to make it all work. And I don't trust UN estimates on anything, but the UN estimated after the year of the coronavirus and all of the other problems that have taken place in the last year that a billion new people or a billion people will be pushed into uh, hunger and poverty because of all of this. And maybe it's increased migration. Maybe that's one of the things we see as a result of it. But certainly you can't imagine a billion people starving and just letting it go, just sitting there to die.
uh, yeah, that's exactly right. And of course, there's going to be a lot of dollars and euros that are going to be taken from taxpayers and sent to these places. Of course, most of it's going to go into this offshore bank accounts of the ruling classes, but still, it's going to basically harm middle class taxpayers more. Now, the consequences of this, I gotta believe we're heading for a real explosion this year, next year, the whole decade.
Well, let's add to food prices the idea of energy prices going up. Now, you've been talking about energy as something people should be invested in for the last several months, and at least. And one of the things. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Matt. I was just
What
thinking.
really came up as I was reviewing this newsletter over the weekend. One of the things that was really shocking about it, and I didn't realize, is that um, the short interest in energy stocks in the energy industry is 5 times greater than the short interest in any other industry, which basically means hedge funds, money managers, pension funds are betting that the energy complex is going to continue to go down in value, not up. And I don't know. So it seems a little overweighted, I guess.
Well, it could be that the investment professionals in the world have become woke, and they're actually buying this stuff about corporate responsibility and hiring diversity directors and believing in global warming. Another story, but global Earth has been warming and cooling for 4.5 billion years. We don't need to get into that. And all this stuff about everything being about race today. So yeah, uh, part of that is that extractive industries in general are evil. And perhaps the oil industry is the most evil of all extractive industries.
Why is it? Why has it been labeled that way, do you think?
God, it's all of this really starts in the schools where kids are miseducated. It's funny because when I was in school, I believed in, I was an intellectually precocious kid. And like I read Rachel Carson's famous book, The Silent Spring, when it first came out. And, not knowing too much, it was a good book in many ways, very one sided, of course. But, I worried about these things. I mean, I liked, nature. I was a Boy Scout, and I liked the birds and the bees, and I worried about these things and so forth. So I saw myself as a conservationist and so forth. But as life went on and I learned more about economics and science, I've worried less about those things. In fact, I don't like to worry about anything, but I worry about things other than that, frankly, at this point. Um, I think a lot of it has to do with the education. I mean, a lot of these people are sincere. I consider them very misguided, but also very sincere. So they're a majority, I think, a large majority. All the kids, all the young people, hey, just about everybody well into their 40s are, have these memes that have been implanted in their brains about kind of the neo-Marxist view about the way the world should work. And it's hard to get rid of it. I mean, if you grow up in a madrasa, you can't get that out of your head for your whole life. I mean, I grew up in a cannibalistic death cult of the Roman Catholic Church. And the things that you are told when you are young by people in authority who seem to have intellectual and moral suasion both, it takes decades to get that crap out of your mind and start thinking for yourself. So this is why I'm pessimistic about things like the way the corporations of the world are going and whether these trends are going to continue. I'm sure they will, because people will do what they think is right. First of all, even Stalin and Hitler and Mao, they did what they did because they believed they were morally correct. They really did, all of them.
Yep.
I think we're doing the right thing. People really want to do the right thing. So I just think they have the wrong idea of what the right thing is. So yeah, the trend's going to continue. Oh, but getting back to the oil companies, that's why they hate the oil companies, because there's been so much propaganda. And of course, the people that run oil companies, like all big corporations, have been hypocrites. They talk this talk like BP, for instance. It's got this green sun as its motto, and then there's this disaster in the Gulf, and of course everybody hates them. They're basically hypocrites. But why am I bullish oil companies, and why do I think a substantial, and I've got to change this, most of my portfolio for years has been gold and uranium oriented. But now I'm going to start moving more into oil. And here's one for you, maybe even coal. Coal is the thing that absolutely everybody hates. I mean, it's the devil incarnate. So things that are cheap and nobody wants them but are important, fashions change. Something about oil stocks. Back in 1980, well, when there were lines at gas stations and gasoline was rationed, I mean, a lot of people alive today don't realize that that actually happened within living memory of some people. And you couldn't get gas. It was really unbelievable. The lines around US gas stations were many blocks long. Okay, so back in those days, the Standard and Poor index was about 30% of its value was in oil and oil-related companies, drillers and tanker shipping and things like that. Today, it's less than 3%. I mean, it's basically collapsed. And what did you point out earlier when we were talking? I don't know if you mentioned it now, if I'm overlapping the two conversations, that the short interest in oil stocks is
5 times greater than any other industry category.
That is really interesting because oil companies are getting out of oil. I mean, BP has said that they want to get out of oil. Shell has said they want to get out of oil. Everybody hates oil and people are short it. The way professionals were short GameStop a few months ago, it's wonderful when everybody's short a stock because a little bit of buying, you wind up with a short squeeze, which is fantastic for being long. So yeah, I'm going to start getting really seriously long oil stocks at this point of all kinds.
There's one thing I grew up in the brainwashing environment where oil is dirty and coal is bad and all that. So I had that indoctrination coming in through my education. But there was something that I was listening to a presentation Bill Bonner gave once at one of the Stansberry editors conferences, and I might have it. It's a little bit wrong, but he said that he basically charted the progress of man along with the discovery and utilization of energy sources. And you just see this huge uptick in lifespan and quality of life as soon as we began to really use oil. And I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like a hockey stick chart. And he was trying to explain, I guess, the miracle that oil has been for humanity, like it's just a pure miracle. If you don't to see it as something that's dirty, you're okay. Even if it has some negative consequences, its utilization, its positive consequences have been so net positive for humanity. It's not even close. And I don't know if this is exactly accurate if I'm remembering right, but he said that contained essentially within 1 tablespoon of crude oil is the energy equivalent of 40 man hours of labor.
Hmm.
And I mean, if you think of that, you think of it being able to unlock in a tablespoon 40 hours of manual labor, by being able to power these machines and so forth. And you can just see like how that can cause this hyperstick type growth. And to look at oil only as dirty and not see it as a miracle that has like saved so many, like increased the quality of life for humanity beyond any imaginable measure. I think it's foolish to just look at it as dirty.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, just like a lot of kids in the inner cities don't know that milk comes from cows, they think it comes from cartons. And the views of most people that are so cut off from actual production. I mean, most people are just
Sure.
handling stuff or shuffling papers or maybe retailing or sitting in offices. They actually don't understand where things come from. That's one of the reasons why I like Mike Rowe and his show. I think it's called Dirty Jobs, is he actually gets into how things are produced and how things are maintained and so forth. So yeah, sure, if the average person feels this way and has no knowledge, it's going to be reflected in his voting. And these politicians are like the worst things distilled. They're going to be in offices. Yeah, so it's cause for pessimism, for sure.
Okay.
And of course, uranium. The only thing people hate more than oil is uranium, which is really perverse because factually, it is the safest, the cleanest, and the cheapest form of mass power generation. And each of those assertions I just made have to be discussed because nobody believes that. They believe that it's extremely dangerous and extremely dirty and extremely expensive. And of course, the last is actually kind of true, but only true because of the immense amount of regulation that's been put on it, where we're still using essentially first generation power plants, where now, if scientific developments were allowed to be applied, and they're not because of regulation, I mean, nuclear power actually would be just about too cheap to monitor and by far safer than anything else. Anyway.
I'm sorry. Did you see did you see that video that Tom Dyson sent us a couple months ago? It was a lecture from a guy who had started a nuclear startup company, basically, and he was debunking all of these myths associated with nuclear. And it was, I mean, he said a lot of things that I'd never heard before. It was incredibly compelling. I don't know if you remember seeing it or not, but I'll dig it up and resend it to you.
Yeah, yeah, do that. Yeah, do that.
Really made.
Uh, yeah, exactly. And and I think we mentioned this the other day. It's not really just uranium, but if it hadn't been for the U.S. nuclear weapons program, we'd probably be using thorium, not uranium, number 90 as opposed to 92 on the periodic table. It's um, the actual uh, element metal itself is much cheaper than uranium. Not that uranium is expensive in terms of the amount of power you get from it. I mean, the cost of the actual fuel to run a nuclear plant is about 5%. It's actually completely trivial, unlike the fuel that it takes to run a gas or a coal or an oil-fired plant, which is, that's most of the cost. So it's wonderful, but
Thanks, Ron.
office with the average person.
Well, one of the things it seems like it's happening, so something interesting happening in the uranium market now, and you've talked about uranium as an investment already, but I saw this report that um, uranium miners were buying uranium at spot price themselves. The producers were buying it at spot price because it was selling for still vastly below the cost of producing it. And does this happen very often where you have the actual miners that are really that are the producers that actually just start buying in the market instead of selling into the market?
I don't think I've ever heard of it before. When is the last time that a copper miner bought copper or a gold miner bought gold to inventory it?
Yeah, not to hedge, not futures to protect pricing, but actually to take possession of it.
Yeah, the actual physical uh, yellow cake, which is generally the form that it's traded in. Um, yeah, this is really interesting. Uh, the average cost of production of uranium is about, it depends on a lot of things, but say it costs $30 a pound for U3O8, which is yellow cake. It's a yellow powder that comes in 55-gallon drums. And then from there, it's refined to the metal. And then from there, it's refined into either U235 or U238. Long story. But yeah, this is very unusual and very smart because a lot of these, I actually don't know how or why it's happening at this point, because you'd think that the utilities would be buying it, recognizing what the economics are, but the miners are buying it. So it could be, one of the reasons for it could be that miners that have made commitments to utilities, long-term contracts, which is how most of the uranium in the world is sold on long-term contracts. So they realize that their costs to deliver it are higher than they can mine it at. That's probably what's going on. It's the high-cost miners that are probably doing most of it, but maybe not. I'll have to talk to some of my friends in the business and get some on-the-ground data.
Yeah, I mean, it's really shocking, especially if it's something that's been happening for a little while at all. I mean, it just seems like I'd never heard of it before. It stuck out to me as being very odd. So I guess we'll see. There's one other thing that really jumped out in the news. Something you forwarded to me, which was some actions by the Spanish government toward real estate owners, and essentially in certain provinces in Spain, properties that were unoccupied and were deemed speculations by the government. These were speculative real estate holdings, according to the government, and they were held by the government says large holders, which means people who own 10 or more pieces of real estate. They deemed a number of properties in certain areas to be better served to be put to better use, I guess. So the government is essentially requisitioning them and going to be using them to house migrants, as I understand it. And and when they do this, they're taking the property essentially from the landlord, but they're telling the landlord it's only for 7 years, and don't worry, we're going to pay you rent at this rate, which is below market, of course. But first, we need you to make some improvements to the property to make it more habitable for the people that we're going to put in there. And you said this seems like this is happening more than just there, but seems crazy to me that this is happening like this.
Yeah, yeah, especially in a place, well, especially in Europe, because frankly, the population of Europe and Spain in particular is falling rather radically. It's dropping about 1% per year because people in Europe generally, and Spain in particular, are not reproducing. They're not having 2.2 kids per woman, so the population can at least stay stable. So the native Spanish population is dropping. So wait a minute, why is there a housing shortage when the number of Spaniards is actually going down by like 1% per year? Gee, and then the second thing is, I don't think that article detailed exactly where this is, but when we're talking about speculative real estate in Spain, that sounds like resort real estate, frankly. And that means the Mediterranean coast, the Costa Brava, the Costa del Sol, places like that. So, but, but, but generally speaking, those are pretty nice apartments. Uh, Maybe they're unoccupied now because tourism has collapsed, but then migration is still going on. I mean, any North African or any African period who can get across the Mediterranean and land in Spain, and there are a number of ways of doing it, including through the Spanish colonies in Africa. Once you're in there, then you fly right to Spain. So where are these people? I mean, I haven't been back to Spain. I used to live in Spain, but I haven't been there for years. I mean, maybe the Spaniards are saying, wait a minute, we can't have all these people living on the street. Oh, how about those rich people that have empty apartments that they were renting to Northern Europeans? Who the hell knows how this is going to want, but it's only going to encourage more migrants. But the fact that the native Spanish population is basically in demographic collapse, the whole thing stinks, but it's happening all over Europe. This has actually been happening. There's been talk of this in Germany in particular, and in Italy also, absolutely in Italy. So it's not just Spain. And Italy is having the same demographic collapse. So this is, it sounds like the basis for a conspiracy theory. Or is it just plain stupidity? That's possible too.
Well, you know, I think when I look at some of the towns I think I see in here are, well, I know Ibiza is on here. So that's that party island,
Yeah.
essentially. Um, uh, isn't Valencia, isn't that like a place where all the Brits have their holiday homes? Valencia?
Well, Valencia is not on the coast. It's in the interior, but it's still southern Spain. So that would make sense.
Yeah, so anyway, but it's interesting, and I wonder. I mean, there are lots of underutilized pieces of real estate in the U.S. too. I mean, why wouldn't some do-gooding official here decide to you know, requisition those and make those available to house all the homeless and new migrants that are kind of coming across the border today?
Well, why not indeed? I mean, because the number of homeless people is growing. And of course, with rent forbearance, uh, a lot of people, that's supposed to come to an end. I doubt if it will. It's supposed to come to an end in a few days, but I doubt if it will. So some of those people theoretically could be put out on the street. Well, there's already tent cities on the sidewalks and lots of cities around the country. So I think it's going to grow, especially as the standard of living drops, which we've been talking about. And this is a time bomb that's ticking faster and faster.
Yeah, and I just think, I mean, you know, when people see all these empty buildings, you think about all the downtown corridors that are full of office buildings that are not utilized anymore because all the remote effort to remote work now. There's certainly these major department store chains like Kmart. I mean, I don't know how many giant empty box of buildings that are around the country because Sears and Kmart are there. I mean, that's, of course, those don't make for the best accommodations as compared to someone's vacation home, but you got to imagine that those are just going to be taken back in some way and be used in that way. It's hard to imagine it won't happen as things get more desperate.
Is it possible that life will actually resemble a post-apocalyptic sci-fi movie where the people living on the street are organized and decide to just break into a building and take it over?
We have seen some examples of that. If you recall, in outside of Portland, there was people who I can't remember the exact scenario, but they were attempting to foreclose on these folks, and a bunch of the Antifa people surrounded it and wouldn't allow them to actually the sheriff's department to execute the eviction notice. And so there was a long standoff there where they just said, no, this is another free zone essentially, and this house is now ours. I mean, we're just going to keep it. And you got to imagine there. I mean, you can only really there are a lot of properties around the U.S. and people get more. You got to imagine that people will be able to do more. Squatting is going to continue.
Yeah, I ought to reach out to my friend that lives in Portland and see what he says about this. But if I had a nice apartment in downtown Portland and saw what was going on in the streets all the time, well, when my rental contract ended, I'm gone.
Yeah, or if you're renting, you just keep living there and you don't have to pay your rent, Doug. I don't know. You don't have to
Oh,
leave. Really.
well, that's 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 absolutely right. You can put up with some inconvenience for free rent, of course,
Right.
until the utilities get cut off.
Yeah, which I'm sure there's going to be lots of reasons. And actually, I know that there was some part of the 1.9 trillion stimulus bill that was designed for to help people with their utilities. So I don't know. Probably milk this thing for another year. I think.
I can't wait until it eventually comes out how many hundreds of billions are actually going to be directly stolen by professional scamsters from that money that's sitting there. And you just you just fill out the papers, file the applications, bribe whoever you need to among, and there it is. Big money, big money.
Big money, and we know there were lots of people doing that. Just a similar small game, with the unemployment, the COVID unemployment. People who are in California penitentiaries were receiving, the $1,000 extra a week bonus for unemployment. I mean, it's pretty amazing that they were able to get away.
Oh yeah, for years. I mean, it's been an ongoing scam where prisoners file tax returns phonied up and get refunds in their own and other people's names, and the IRS sends it out because they've got scores, hundreds of millions actually, in counting businesses' tax returns. You can't look at them all. It's all done by computer. So a refund is owed, you send the check out. This is, it's a sign of a system in collapse, actually.
Yeah, I think so. All of these things are, and they're tension points that are going to boil over. And food and energy prices, those are the big ones. Those are the ones that, like, you can have all this money printing going on. You can cause asset prices to go up, but as soon as you start to experience shortages, because for a variety of reasons of food or energy, or that the currencies are so destroyed that you see the same price rise in those things, people start to feel pain real fast, and things can get messy unbelievably quickly.
Yeah, it's all going to be compounded by the stock market and the bond markets when they both collapse, which is going to happen. I don't know when. I figure fairly soon, maybe this year, finally. Uh, I mean, the trillions of dollars that the government is printing up and distributing to favored entities, well, most of it's still going into the stock and bond markets. But when that stops, there's going to be pension funds and companies and a lot of people that thought they had something that it's disappeared. This is a big deal we're looking at here.
It is a big deal, and we'll try and cover something a more positive take to it, later this week. But
We'll find something positive. There are positive things going on.
certainly are. Okay, so we'll leave it at that though for today, Doug, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah.